My name is Elara, and I'm 25 now, working in a field I never could have imagined even a few years ago. But this story isn't about who I am today. It's about who I was forced to be when I was 19. For 6 terrifying weeks, I was a ghost, or at least, I had to pretend to speak for them. My voice a stolen echo in a rich man's lonely mansion. I was a fraud, a puppet in a cruel game, and every word I spoke was a lie fed to me by my captor. I never imagined the man I was sent to con, a famous skeptic who tore apart frauds like me for sport, would become the only person who could hear my real voice. I never dreamed that our silent conversations in a darkened room, surrounded by monsters, would be my only path to freedom. It was a con built on grief, but it became a rescue built on trust. Before I dive into this story and show you how a complete stranger saved my life by pretending to talk to the dead, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt trapped, like your own voice was silenced, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers out there, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the most important stories are the ones we're afraid to tell. My life with my Uncle Marcus began the day my real life ended. I was 16 when my parents' car skidded on a patch of black ice. And just like that, the world I knew was gone. Marcus was my mother's brother, her only living relative, and by default, my new guardian. He arrived at the funeral in a suit that was a little too shiny, his smile a little too wide for the occasion. He smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne, a scent that would come to define the next 3 years of my claustrophobic existence. He sold my childhood home with a speed that felt predatory, moving me into his cramped, perpetually dim apartment that sat above a noisy bar. The sounds of muffled arguments and shattering glass became the soundtrack to my nights. He wasn't physically cruel, not at first. His cruelty was quieter, more insidious. It was in the way he'd dismiss my grief as teenage melodrama, the way he'd borrow the modest inheritance my parents left for my education until it was just gone. He saw me not as a niece to be cared for, but as an asset to be managed, and eventually, a tool to be used. I was a ghost in his home long before I ever pretended to speak to one. I learned to make myself small, to be silent, to not ask for anything that might inconvenience him. My dreams of college, of a life of my own, slowly faded like old photographs left in the sun. The desperation began to seep through the cracks of his slick facade about a year before the con. There were hushed, angry phone calls at 3 in the morning. Men with hard eyes and ill-fitting suits would sometimes wait for him in the hallway. The smell of fear began to overpower the smell of cologne. He was in debt, deep and dark, to people who didn't accept apologies or payment plans. That was when his gaze started to fall on me differently. He wasn't just looking at a burden anymore, he was looking for a solution. The solution's name was Julian Thorne. Marcus found him in a glossy magazine article. Thorne was a tech billionaire, a recluse, a genius who had built a data analysis empire from his dorm room. But the article focused on a different side of him, his fervent, aggressive skepticism. Years earlier, Thorne's younger sister Lily had died from a rare genetic disorder. In the wake of their grief, his family had been targeted by a legion of charlatans, faith healers, psychics, and mediums, all claiming they could contact Lily for a price. Thorne had dedicated a significant portion of his fortune to exposing these kinds of frauds, creating a foundation that debunked paranormal claims with cold, hard science. He was, the article stated, a fortress of logic and reason, utterly impenetrable. And to my uncle, a fortress was just a challenge. Everyone has a crack in their armor, Elara, he said, tossing the magazine onto the greasy kitchen table. And this guy's crack is shaped like his dead sister. For 2 weeks, he turned our small apartment into a boot camp for the macabre. He had somehow, through methods I didn't dare ask about, acquired a shocking amount of personal information about Lily Thorne. There were photocopies of diary pages, printouts of old social media profiles, even transcripts of interviews with her childhood friends. My job was to become her. I memorized her favorite book, the name of her first pet, the song she hated more than anything, the secret nickname she had for her brother. I studied her handwriting until I could mimic its elegant loops. Marcus drilled me for hours each day. He'd shout questions at me from across the room. What was her recurring nightmare? Who was her first kiss? What did she want to be when she grew up? If I hesitated, if I got a single detail wrong, his temper would flare. The quiet, insidious cruelty was gone, replaced by something sharp and terrifying, a thrown plate, a backhanded comment that felt like a slap. Once, a grip on my arm that was tight enough to leave a constellation of purple bruises on my skin. You need to be perfect, he'd hiss, his face inches from mine. This isn't a game. Our lives depend on this. My life depends on this, which means your life depends on this. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. He had nothing left to lose, and people like that are the most dangerous in the world. The day of the first séance, I felt a numbness that was colder than fear. I wore a simple gray dress Marcus had picked out, something he thought looked appropriately somber and ethereal. He drove us to Thorne's estate, a place that didn't look like a home but a monument to minimalism. It was all glass and steel and sharp angles, perched on a cliff overlooking the churning gray ocean. It was the last place on Earth you'd expect to find a ghost. Marcus's associate, a hulking, silent man named Bruno, sat in the front seat, his presence a constant, suffocating weight. A severe-looking woman let us in and led us to a library. It was a cavernous room, lined with thousands of books arranged, not by author, but by color, creating a seamless, sterile rainbow. In the center of the room sat a single, modern table and 3 chairs, and in one of those chairs, waiting for us, was Julian Thorne. He was younger than the magazine photos suggested, perhaps in his mid-30s. He had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He didn't rise to greet us, he just watched, his expression a perfect blank slate. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus began, his voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "Thank you for seeing us. This is Elara. She has a gift." Julian Thet's eyes flicked to me, and for a terrifying second, I felt like one of his data sets, being analyzed and found wanting. "So I've been told," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please." We sat. Marcus and Bruno positioned themselves a few feet behind me, like guards. The setup felt less like a spiritual gathering and more like an interrogation. I placed my hands on the table, my palms slick with sweat. I could feel Marcus's stare on the back of my neck. I could feel Julian Thorne's stare on my face. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. I closed my eyes, just as Marcus had instructed, and began the script. I spoke of feeling a presence, a young woman, full of light but gone too soon. I mentioned a name, Lily. Thorne said nothing. His silence was more unnerving than any question could have been. I pushed on, my voice trembling slightly. I talked about her love for classic literature, her frustration at not being able to finish her favorite novel before she passed. These were details from her journal. They were supposed to be my proof. "She's showing me flowers," I whispered, keeping my eyes squeezed shut. This was the moment Marcus had drilled into me, the first big emotional hook. So many beautiful flowers. She loved them, especially lilies. The white ones, they brought her so much peace. There was a pause. The silence stretched, becoming thin and brittle. I had delivered the line perfectly. This was a detail from an interview with a distant aunt. It was supposed to be irrefutable. When Julian Thorne finally spoke, his voice was dangerously soft. "That sits incorrect." My eyes snapped open. I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. "What?" "Lily was allergic," he continued, his gaze unwavering, analytical. "Severely. She despised lilies. She said they were funereal. She thought it was a cruel joke from the universe that her name was Lily, but the flower could kill her." My mind went completely blank. A mistake. I'd made a mistake. Marcus had given me bad information, or I had remembered it wrong. It didn't matter. I was exposed. The con was over. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I instinctively glanced back at my uncle. The look on his face was not of anger, not yet. It was something colder. It was the look a man gives an appliance that has just broken, useless, disposable. My entire body began to tremble. I turned back to Julian Thorne, my carefully constructed facade shattered. I didn't see a mark anymore. I saw a man who knew I was a liar. I was waiting for the scorn, the rage, the triumphant call to his security to have us thrown out. But it didn't come. Instead, something shifted in his expression. The cool, analytical light in his eyes softened, replaced by something I couldn't decipher. He wasn't looking at a fraud anymore. He was looking at me. He saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in my eyes. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, down to my wrist where the sleeve of my dress had ridden up just enough to expose the faint, yellowing edges of the bruises from Marcus's grip. He saw everything. He knew it was a lie, and he knew I was afraid. I was a bird with a broken wing, pushed out of the nest and forced to fly, and he saw it. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower, laced with an intensity that was for me and me alone. He played along. Perhaps my memory is failing me. Grief does that. He didn't break eye contact. Then he asked a question for the ghost he knew wasn't there, a question for the girl who was. Lily, he said, his voice a calm anchor in my raging sea of panic. If you're truly here, tell me, are you in a safe place? The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. It was a silence filled with a new, terrifying, impossible meaning. His question was a key, sliding into a lock I didn't even know existed. Are you in a safe place? He wasn't asking his sister, he was asking me. My breath hitched. I was supposed to deliver the canned response. Marcus had prepared for this exact line of questioning. My mouth opened, but the words caught in my throat. I looked into the eyes of the man I was supposed to be tricking, and I saw an escape hatch, a terrifying, unbelievable glimmer of hope. I had to answer. I could feel Marcus's impatience radiating from behind me. I managed to choke out the scripted line, my voice a broken whisper. I am at peace. But as I said the words, a single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cold cheek. It was a betrayal of the lie, a testament to the truth. Julian saw it. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. The séance ended shortly after that. Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement. He hadn't noticed the subtext, the mistake, the silent exchange. All he saw was a wealthy man who seemed to be falling for it. On the car ride back to the apartment, he was jubilant, already planning the next session, talking about figures that made my stomach churn. He's hooked, Elara. You were brilliant. He didn't notice my silence, my trembling hands. He didn't notice that I wasn't his puppet anymore. I was a co-conspirator with his mark. I was terrified of Marcus, but a new, more complex fear was taking root. The fear of hope. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, and Julian Thorne had just handed it to me in a darkened room, disguised as a question to a ghost. The days between the first and second séance were the longest of my life. Marcus was on a high, his good mood making him even more unpredictable. He'd swing from magnanimous praise, promising me a small cut of the fortune we were going to bleed from Thorne, to paranoid rage, grilling me again on Lily's life, convinced I would make another mistake. He never mentioned the lily flower slip-up. In his greed-fueled delusion, he had either missed it or dismissed it as Thorne's own grief-addled memory. I was a prisoner, walking on a tightrope. Every moment I was in that apartment, I could feel the walls closing in. But Julian's question echoed in my mind. Are you in a safe place? It was a lifeline. I clung to it. I spent hours alone in my room, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, wondering what he intended. Was it a trap? A game? Was he a cat toying with a mouse before the final killing pounce? A man like him, a man who hunted frauds for a living, wasn't supposed to show compassion. It didn't make sense. But the look in his eyes, it hadn't been cruel. It had been understanding, and that was more confusing than anything else. The night of the second séance, the air was thick with a heavy, wet fog that clung to the cliffs around the estate. It felt appropriate. Inside, the library was the same, impeccably clean, clinically organized. Julian was waiting, his expression as unreadable as before. But this time, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes when he looked at me, a confirmation. We have a secret. Marcus, more confident now, took his seat with a smug air. He'd instructed me to be more dramatic this time, to really sell the emotion. Little did he know, the emotion was already there, raw and overwhelming. I was about to engage in the most dangerous conversation of my life, right under my captor's nose. After the initial theatrics of me reaching out to the spirit world, Julian interrupted. "The silence in this room is distracting," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I read that rhythmic sounds can help focus the mind, to better connect with the other side." He reached down beside his chair and produced a small, elegant wooden metronome. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't in the script. He set it on the table between us. "Do you mind?" I glanced at Marcus, who just shrugged, impatient to get to the part where Lily tells her brother to donate to his favorite shell corporation. I nodded mutely. Julian set the metronome to a slow, steady rhythm. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound filled the room, a heartbeat for our conspiracy. "Lily," Julian said. His eyes locked on mine. "Last time your voice seemed weak. It must take a great deal of energy to speak. Let's try something simpler. Knocks. Can you knock on the table for me? One knock for yes, two knocks for no. Can you do that?" My mind raced. It was brilliant, simple, undeniable. Marcus couldn't object. It was a classic séance trope. My hand resting on the table felt impossibly heavy. "Let's test it," Julian continued, his tone conversational. He was establishing the rules of our new language. "Lily, I've been thinking about our childhood home. Was your favorite color blue?" He knew it was green. The detail was in her diary, a page I had been forced to memorize. He was giving me the first question on a test he had written for me. My finger, trembling, tapped the underside of the table once. Knock. Then, a second time. Knock. Knock. Two knocks. No. A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of Julian's mouth. "Of course," he murmured, as if remembering. "It was green, always green." He looked at me, and his eyes said, "Good, you understand." The metronome kept its steady beat. Click, 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 click. Marcus was leaning forward now, utterly engrossed in the performance. He saw a spirit communicating. I saw a door being unlocked. Julian's questions started out innocuously. He asked about her pet dog, about a family vacation. Each question was a softball, a detail he knew I would know, allowing us to establish a rhythm, to cement the code as a believable part of the act. Then, his voice dropped slightly, the questions becoming more pointed, each one a dagger wrapped in velvet. "Lily, the people you're with now, do they treat you well?" It was a test of my nerve. A yes-no answer was too simple, it might raise suspicion. I hesitated. How do I answer that? I couldn't just knock twice. I channeled the spirit of Lily. I let out a soft, shaky breath. "It's complicated here," I whispered, imbuing the words with a fake, otherworldly sadness that was really my own. Julian nodded, accepting the answer. He changed tactics. The questions became sharper, more direct, shielded by the context of a brother talking to his lost sister. "Lily, are you in danger?" Click, clack. His eyes bored into mine. My finger tapped once. Knock. Yes. The sound was deafening in the silence. I risked a glance at Marcus. He was smiling, mistaking my genuine fear for a convincing performance. He thought the danger was spiritual. "Is it because you are alone?" Click, clack. Knock, knock. "No." "Is there someone with you?" Click, clack. Knock. "Yes." "This person with you, Do they have control over you? Click. Knock. Yes. My heart was going to explode. Every tap was a confession, a plea. Can you leave if you want to? Click. Click. Knock. Knock. No. The finality of that answer hung in the air between us. He knew everything. The rest of the seance was a blur. Julian guided the conversation back to safer topics, asking Lily to share a happy memory, giving me a chance to recite the lines Marcus had fed me. He was protecting me, protecting our secret channel. When it was over, Marcus was even more ecstatic than before. The knocks had convinced him utterly. He clapped me on the shoulder on the way out, a gesture that was meant to be congratulatory but felt like a brand. The next week, the pattern continued. The third seance. Julian was prepared with a new tool. He brought out an old, dusty Ouija board. I found this in the attic, he lied smoothly. They say it can be a clearer conduit. He placed it on the table. Lily, perhaps you can guide my hand. Spell out what you want to say. Marcus grunted his approval. This was even better. Julian placed his hand lightly on the planchette. I placed mine next to his, our fingers barely touching. The faint warmth of his skin was a stark contrast to the cold dread that usually filled me. You guide me, Lily, he said, looking at me. Tell me what you need to. He held the planchette loosely, allowing me to control it completely. Under the guise of a spirit's message, our fingers danced across the board. To Marcus, sitting several feet away, it was a random, spooky spelling, but Julian was angled in such a way that only he and I could clearly see the letters. My hand trembled as I guided his. His fingers tightened infinitesimally on mine. A silent acknowledgement, message received. He then began to use the board to transmit information to me. He'd ask a question aloud, then as I began to spell an answer, he would apply the slightest pressure, subtly nudging the planchette towards letters, a Morse code of pushes and pulls that only I could feel. Lily, I'm feeling so unsafe in this big house alone, he said, his voice laced with fake vulnerability. I'm thinking of installing a new security system. The technician said the NORTHGATE is the weakest point. Do you agree? He was telling me where to go. An escape route. My mind reeled with the implications. An escape. A real escape. It was no longer a vague hope. It was a plan, being formed right here, our fingers whispering secrets on a child's game board. But as our conspiracy grew, so did Marcus's impatience. He wasn't interested in comforting a grieving brother anymore. He wanted his payday. This has gone on long enough. He snarled at me one night after a séance where I'd failed to steer the conversation towards money. Next time, you get him to make the transfer. Lily wants him to donate to a foundation for families who have lost children. $1 million. You tell him Lily won't find peace until he does it. You make him do it, Elara, or we're done here. The way he said we're done here sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a threat to end the con. It was a threat to end me. I was a loose end, a witness. The moment the money was in his account, I was more valuable to him dead than alive. Bruno started shadowing me even inside the cramped apartment, his silent, hulking presence, a constant reminder of my mortality. The fourth séance was scheduled for 2 days later. It was my deadline, my final performance. It was my only chance to get out alive. My entire future now rested on a coded conversation with a man I barely knew, and a single desperate word spelled out on a Ouija board, ESCAPE. The day of the final séance arrived with an unnerving stillness. The sky was a sheet of pewter, the air cold and heavy. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you've run out of fear and all that's left is a single, clear purpose. It was the calm of the condemned or the liberated. I wasn't sure which yet. Marcus was a coiled spring of greedy anticipation. He'd paced the apartment all morning, his phone buzzing incessantly, with calls he'd answer in harsh whispers. His creditors were closing in. This wasn't just a payday for him, it was a lifeline. He checked the details of the offshore account where the money was to be transferred a dozen times. Bruno drove us to the estate. He kept looking at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes flat and empty. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he would have no more hesitation in disposing of me than he would in crushing an insect. I was no longer a person to them. I was the final piece of a machine, and once my function was complete, I would be discarded. When we entered the library, the scene was set as it always was: the table, the chairs, the sterile order of the books, but there was a new tension in the air, a high-frequency hum of impending violence. Julian was already seated. He looked at me, and his gaze was different this time. It was steady, resolute. It said, "Today is the day. Are you ready?" I gave him the smallest possible nod, a gesture so tiny that anyone else would have missed it, but he didn't miss it. Our plan, pieced together through knocks and whispers from the Ouija board, was simple and terrifyingly risky. Julian had a team on standby, his own private security, men he trusted implicitly. They were former federal agents, professionals. They were already on the estate grounds, hidden, waiting. He had also alerted the local police, giving them a vague tip about a potential extortion attempt, enough to have them nearby without triggering a full-scale raid that could go sideways. Everything hinged on my signal. The signal was tied to a question Julian would ask. During our last session, he'd guided my hand on the board to spell it out. When I ask if Lily is ready to cross over, that is the moment. It was poetic and brutal. My freedom was tied to his sister's symbolic final piece. The séance began. Marcus, standing behind me like a warden, cleared his throat impatiently. "Get on with it," he muttered. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I reached for the character of the frightened medium one last time, but what came out was something more. It was my own voice, my own terror, draped in the gossamer thin disguise of a spirit's message. I spoke of a soul's weariness, of being trapped between worlds, of a desperate yearning for peace. The words flowed out of me, raw and real, because they were my own. I was Lily and I was Elara. We were both trapped girls who just wanted to go home. "She sups agitated today," Julian observed, his voice calm and steady, playing his part for Marcus. "What is it, Lily? What sep's troubling you?" This was my cue to bring up the money. "There is an unfinished task," I whispered, my voice cracking with genuine emotion. "A legacy for the children, the ones left behind. You must help them. You must give them peace." "A donation," Marcus prompted from behind me, his voice a low growl. "She needs you to make a donation." "Yes," I breathed. "A foundation, $1 million. Only then, can she be free." I watched Julian's face. He didn't even flicker. He played the part of a grieving brother wrestling with a momentous decision. He looked at me, his eyes full of a carefully crafted sorrow. $1 million that sips a lot. "It is the price of peace," I said, the words feeling like acid on my tongue. Marcus was practically vibrating with anticipation. He thought he had won. He thought Julian was on the hook. Julian let the silence stretch, wringing every last drop of tension from the moment. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He looked directly at me, past the persona, past the con, and into the eyes of the terrified 19-year-old girl he was about to save. The entire world seemed to shrink down to the space between us. The metronome wasn't there today. There was only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. Then he asked the question. "Lily," he said, his voice soft but clear as a bell, "if I do this, will you finally be at rest? Are you ready to cross over completely, to find your final peace?" He gave the nod, the signal. It was almost invisible, a slight dip of his chin, but to me it was a starting gun. My part of the plan was to create a diversion, chaos, something to disrupt the scene and give his team the opening they needed. For a second, I froze. My fear was a physical thing, a block of ice in my chest. Marcus was right behind me. Bruno was by the door. But then I looked at Julian, and I saw the trust in his eyes. He was trusting me to be brave for just 10 more seconds. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I sucked in a ragged breath and threw myself backward. My chair screeched across the polished floor and crashed into Marcus's legs. At the same moment, I flung my arms forward, sweeping them across the table. A heavy book, the Ouija board, and a carafe of water went flying. The carafe shattered on the floor, an explosive sound in the quiet room. It was the trigger. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus roared, stumbling back. He lunged for me, his face a mask of pure fury. The con was blown, he knew it, and his only thought was to silence me. But he never reached me. The library doors burst open. It wasn't one man, but three, dressed in black, moving with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. They were Julian's security team. One of them, a mountain of a man, intercepted Bruno before he could even process what was happening, tackling him to the ground with a sickening thud. Marcus froze, his hand inches from my arm. His eyes darted from the men to Julian, who was now standing, his expression no longer passive but cold and hard as steel. "Let her go," Julian said. It wasn't set a request. From outside we heard shouting, the screech of tires. The police were making their move. The trap had sprung. Realization dawned on Marcus's face, followed by a wave of disbelief and then pure, venomous hatred, all directed at me. "You," he spat. Before he could move, the other two security men were on him, grabbing his arms and forcing him to his knees. The fight went out of him instantly. It was over. The whole thing, from the signal to Marcus being subdued, had taken less than 30 seconds. The room was suddenly filled with uniformed police officers. The air was electric with shouting, the crackle of radios. I was still on the floor, huddled against the leg of the table, shaking uncontrollably. The whirlwind of motion and sound was overwhelming. My mind couldn't catch up. It was over. It was really over. A figure knelt in front of me, blocking out the chaos. It was Julian. He didn't touch me. He just waited until my eyes focused on his. "Elara," he said, using my real name for the first time. "It's over. You're safe now." And then, the dam of adrenaline and terror that had been holding me together for weeks finally broke. I collapsed into myself, sobbing, not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs of pure, unadulterated relief. He hadn't been toying with me. He hadn't been playing a game. He had saved me. The skeptic who was supposed to be my victim had become my rescuer. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, methodical questions, and lukewarm tea in a ceramic mug that shook in my trembling hands. Julian had me moved to a different wing of the house, a warm, comfortable sitting room that felt like it was on another planet from the cold library of my captivity. He never left my side, while police officers and detectives came in and out. Taking my statement, he sat in a nearby armchair, a silent, steady presence. He didn't speak for me, but his being there gave me the strength to speak for myself. I told them everything about my parents' death, about Marcus's debts, the threats, the coaching, the fear. I told them about the bruises and the stolen inheritance. Every word I spoke felt like I was shedding a layer of skin, peeling away the frightened girl Marcus had created, to reveal someone I hadn't seen in years. When the police were finally done for the night, an exhausted quiet settled over the room. It was just the two of us. I was wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, staring into a fireplace that Julian's housekeeper had lit. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice hoarse. So quickly, was it just the lilies? He was quiet for a moment, watching the flames. "The lilies were the first clue," he said. "It was a sloppy mistake for a supposedly professional con artist, but that wasn't it. Professional frauds are confident. They have a certain arrogance. They look you in the eye and dare you not to believe. You weren't like that." He turned to look at me, his gaze direct but gentle. "I didn't see a predator. I saw prey. I saw the way you flinched when your uncle cleared his throat. I saw the bruise on your wrist, but mostly I saw the terror in your eyes. It was too real. You weren't acting." He paused. "My family was hurt by people like your uncle. They fed on our grief. They were cruel and shameless. When I looked at you, I didn't see that cruelty. I saw a victim of it. So I asked a question, and your tear gave me the answer. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the unspoken things filling the space between us. He explained that Marcus and Bruno were in custody and wouldn't be getting out. The police had already found evidence of Marcus's connections to loan sharks and a mountain of fraud. My testimony was just the final nail in the coffin. The legal process was grueling. Marcus, stripped of his charm and charisma, was just a bitter, hateful man. During a pre-trial hearing, he tried to claim I was the mastermind, that I had manipulated him, but the evidence was overwhelming. Julian had provided me with the best lawyers, who calmly dismantled every lie Marcus told. Testifying was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Standing in that courtroom, looking at my uncle, the man who had stolen 3 years of my life, and telling the truth, felt like my own personal exorcism. When the judge finally handed down their sentences, long ones, for extortion, kidnapping, and a host of other charges, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been in my head for years was finally gone. With Marcus in prison, I was officially free, but I was also completely adrift. I was 19 years old, with no home, no family, and no money. The world felt vast and terrifying. Julian, true to his word, never abandoned me. One afternoon, after the trial was over, he sat down with me in the same sitting room where I'd first given my statement. "You have a choice, Elara," he said, his tone serious. "This is not about charity, and it's not about a debt. It's about giving you the freedom you should have had all along. I can set you up with an apartment, cover your living expenses, and pay for your college education, whatever you want to study. No strings attached. You don't ever have to see me again if you don't want to, or if you'd prefer, you can stay here for a while. This house has more empty rooms than I know what to do with. The choice is completely yours." I looked at him, at this man who had every reason to despise me, to see me as just another charlatan. He had looked past the lie and seen the truth. He hadn't just saved me from Marcus, he had given me back my future. The dynamic between us was shifting. It was no longer rescuer and victim. It was something else, something quieter and more profound. Two people who had met in the dark and found a strange, unexpected light. "I think," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I'd like to stay for a little while." The years that followed were a quiet reconstruction. I didn't stay in Julian's house for long, just a few months, until I felt steady enough to stand on my own 2 feet. He was true to his word. He helped me find a small, sunlit apartment of my own and enrolled me in the local university. I chose to study psychology. There was a certain irony to it, spending my days studying the intricacies of the human mind, manipulation, and trauma, but it felt right. It felt like I was taking the thing that had been used to hurt me and turning it into a tool to help others. My relationship with Julian evolved slowly, naturally. The dramatic tension of our first meetings was replaced by the comfortable quiet of true friendship. We'd have dinner once a week. I'd tell him about my classes. He'd tell me about his latest project, translating complex data into stories I could actually understand. He was no longer the imposing, skeptical billionaire. He was Julian, a man with a dry wit, a surprising love for bad science fiction movies, and a deep, quiet well of kindness he tried very hard to hide from the world. He told me more about Lily. He spoke of her brilliance, her fierce loyalty, and the anger he still felt at his own inability to save her. I realized that in saving me he had, in a way, been trying to right that old wrong. He couldn't protect his sister from illness, but he could protect a girl who was being exploited in her name. It wasn't about pity, it was about honor, and in turn I think I helped him too. I was living proof that his logic and his empathy could coexist, that the world wasn't just made up of predators and prey. Sometimes, there were just people who needed help. After I graduated, with honors, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I went to Julian with a proposal. I wanted to start a foundation, not one that debunked psychics, but one that provided immediate, no questions asked resources for young people trying to escape abusive and controlling domestic situations. A place that could offer legal aid, temporary housing, and therapy. A place that could be the lifeline I never had. He listened to my entire pitch without interruption. When I was done, my voice trembling with passion, he simply smiled. "Aesop already had my lawyers draw up the preliminary paperwork," he said. "I was just waiting for you to ask." That was 5 years ago. Today, I am the executive director of the Lighthouse Project. We've helped hundreds of young men and women find their way out of the dark. Julian is our primary benefactor and sits on the board, but he lets me run it my way. Our partnership, born in a dark room full of lies, has become a collaboration built on unwavering trust. Our weekly dinners are still a tradition, but now they often happen in the warm, chaotic kitchen of the home we share. The sharp, modern edges of his old life, softened by the comfortable clutter of ours. We found in each other not a dramatic whirlwind romance, but something far more rare and durable, a quiet harbor. It's strange to look back on it now. Marcus forced me to become a conduit for a spirit, to be a voice for the dead, but in the end, that bizarre, terrifying ordeal was what allowed me to finally find my own voice. Julian, the man who was supposed to be my enemy, taught me that the most important messages are not always the ones that are spoken aloud. They are in the questions that are brave enough to be asked, in the silences that are filled with understanding, and in the quiet, steady presence of someone who sees you when you feel completely invisible. I was sent to haunt him, but instead, he brought me back to life. The world is full of people who will try to tell you who you are, what you're worth, and what you're capable of, but your voice is your own, even when you're forced to whisper. Finding that one person who is willing to lean in and truly listen can make all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story today. I know it was a long and difficult one, but I hope it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of rooms, a single flicker of hope is enough to start a fire. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had an unexpected ally appear in your life when you needed them most? Share your story in the comments below. This is a safe space for that. And please, don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and hope. Share this with anyone you think might need to hear it. Thank you again for being here with me. Remember to be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.